Okay, so in my last blog I spoke about reflected light in the shadows, creating shadows that sing with a lot of detail. So this photo was one that I discussed the gorgeous yellow glow in the mauve of the shadow, and then up here there's a really cool light showing as well. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of the seagull and show you and talk you through my thinking behind the shadows. This is the area that I mix the cool mauve for my shadows. So today I'm going to use Cobalt Blue and Alizarin Crimson. And I don't clean my brush in between those two colours because generally I'm mixing a mauve with these, and there's very few times I need a perfectly clean blue or red, or if I do then I get out some fresh pigment, or I just wipe across the top, spritz it, and then wipe with the paper towel. Now there's a difference in mauves. If you're creating a shadow, excuse this piece of scrappy paper, if you're creating a shadow and you use a colour that's got more red in it like this is what I would call a red violet. This isn't a shadow mauve, so we need more blue to make a blue violet. So if you can see the difference there between those two, this is what I see happen a lot in class. If your shadow color is too red, it won't actually read like a shadow. So something else I often do is just mix a tiny touch of Naples yellow into that color to just take the prettiness off it. It just grays it a little fraction. We're going to be dropping yellow in as well, so I need to be a little bit cautious. So you can see now, instead of a purple, I've got a warm grey. So that's a nice shadow tone. It won't be quite as warm because I'm going to pull that extra paint up into it. Okay, now we can see if we look at our bird, there's some white on the bird on this side, and then we have this shadow shape which takes up 90% of our painting area. But this is a soft edge, and then part of the shadow has a hard edge because it's cast. This shadow up here is cast by the head blocking the sun from this side of the bird, where this just the body is rounded. So this is a form shadow here, and we want a soft edge. So what I'm going to do is dampen, sorry for the bouncing camera, I'm going to dampen the area that I want the soft edge to the shadow. And you can see I haven't pencil drawn the shadows on because I find the shadow shapes, if they're drawn on, your eye reads them as something more solid than what they are in the painting. And then, so I can just dampen that right up to the beak. That will just help me find the shape here. Okay, so now I'm going to pop my shadow colour that I've just mixed across the body, starting with the area that I dampened. So it comes in underneath the wing. So this is a white bird in the shade. You'll see the colour will grab a little bit more to the dry paper here. And I want to leave a little highlight on the back of the bird. So I did draw that line in at the top of the shadow there to remind myself not to fill that. I'm going to just go around the eye purely because it's yellow. So I'm making sure I don't paint my colour on all the way to where I dampened with water, otherwise it'll just leave me a line further out. If it travels further than what you intend, I cleaned my brush, dried it on the paper towel, and I can just press and lift back a little bit. I very rarely would pat that with a paper towel because it would change the wet to dry consistency of the paper, and it would make it a lot more work for me. So now one of my favorite colors is Naples yellow, and nearly no matter what I'm painting, if it's got a shadow shape on it, like a boat hull or a bird, a vase, whatever it is, usually in that shadow there's some area of warm light. And Naples yellow dropped into mauve gives you that look of warm light. You could use raw sienna or yellow ochre if you don't have Naples, but Naples does it, really perfectly. I'm also going to drop a little bit of it in here because what that will do, as well as warm the shadow, it will lighten the shadow. So I'm going to push it in just under the wing. And when I put the Naples in, the first wash needs to be still glossy and damp, otherwise I'll get a cauliflower. It also is with a really light touch, so I literally load the brush. Hopefully you can see the palette. I don't remember how much is showing. And what I do is push the brush flat so that I've got a wide surface, not a pointy brush. And then when I am putting it on, it's just a really light tickle. I really didn't need to put extra, but I just wanted to show you that stroke again. I'm not pressing the yellow into the purple because what that does is give you grey. If you just lightly drop it into the top, it gives you yellow within the mauve. And so now when I'm looking, I can see a lovely cool shadow up the top. There's coolness on the head, and there's also a really cool start to that shadow where it comes away from the head of the bird. So then I just cleaned my brush, dried it a little bit so that I can just manipulate where I'm putting this colour. I want to go back to my yellow, so again I clean the brush, otherwise if I just picked it up without a proper clean I would be making green. And I want to drop some yellow up near the top of the head to warm that. And at this stage this looks like a rainbow. Like, it's really hard to picture that this will just work out in the end, but I know from experience it does. So I have to trust the process of watercolour. And now I want to add some depth into this shadow in some areas. I don't come into this really wet part because my shadow is, my painting is drying. So I come up into the pigment where there's less moisture. And I want to just drop a little bit more depth of the mauve where I can see it in the painting, in the photo. There's also usually on a shadow that's a form shadow what's called the terminator line or terminator zone, and it's just that first bit of the shadow as it turns away from the light. So I just wanted to darken that a fraction. It probably would have made more sense to do that before I put the yellow in. But what I've got now is, a stripe happening here. So I just want to soften and blend that in a little bit. I can also see, looking at my bird, there's a really lovely cool shadow happening just down there. It's almost like a phthalo blue colour showing, so I'm adding that cerulean blue. And the shadow actually gets stronger in some places, so it's a little bit darker just around what I would call the neck, where the head's sort of sitting into the body of the bird, and just underneath the the shape there. And what I need to do, this is going to be grey, the colour of the wing here. So I just want to soften the edge of this shape that I've created here, because this will blend into the wing. Sometimes when you're talking and painting to demonstrate, you do things without thinking, and that's just something I've missed there. I could quite easily have painted the grey of the wing on first and then the shadow colour over the top. Either way will work fine, but just dampening will let that colour bleed in. This has bled out a little bit and I don't want it to, so I'm going to just, with a clean brush, and you can see every time I lift it off, I'm drying it and taking any pigment off the brush with my fingers. So now I can, because the beak separates the shadow on the other side of the face, I can keep working, and it's a softish shadow there, a little bit lighter than what we've been using, so just a little bit more moisture in it. And it's a small area, so I'm not going to worry about dropping a lot of colour into that area. And there's a soft shadow again at that sort of neck area, and this is quite a bluish tone, so I'm just going to pick up a little bit more cerulean in the mix. And before coming back and just softening the top edge, I clean the brush, take most of the moisture out on the paper towel that's beside me, and just dampen next to it so that the pigment can move up a little bit. I can come down now to the foot and put the brighter reddish orange on. You can see the leg is in shadow, so I'm going to do a darker red there. So it makes sense to me to put the light orangey red that I can see in the light first. Because this is still damp, I'm just going to go very carefully next to it. I don't mind if it bleeds up a little bit into the white fur, but I don't want it to run like mad. So I've just got to control the water where they meet. We've also got shadow and light on this pole, which is like a steel grey. I could use this same mix and just add a little touch more Naples yellow into it. Because the foot's wet, I'm going to work just first on the front. So you can see the effect of that Naples yellow. This is exactly the same mix as here, but more Naples yellow in the mix. And it's not solid and smooth, so I want to be a little bit broken. It's got highlight on the end, and there's some highlight there, so I will lift a little bit of colour out. So I'm happy if I get just a little bit of broken colour here. Lift a little touch of light with a clean brush. And the colour will probably keep running back in there while it's damp. I'll just keep an eye on it. Now this is my darker mix that I use a lot of, brown matter and ultra blue. Just to make a darker grey. Or do you know what, we could just go straight into neutral tint, because it is a real grey. So I've just actually thrown a bit of neutral tint into my dark mix because I was already mixing with the two colours. This has got a shadow down here, so I can just drop a little bit of dark to get started, and along the bottom half of this side. This prong, or whatever you would call it, handle looking thing, is fully in shadow. So do you have to come back and put some of these shadows on again because they've got a hard edge? You can see in the photo they're a cast shadow. This one's a form shadow. It's a little bit softer where the handle turns away from the sun, but that handle casts this shadow onto the pole, so it has a hard edge. So I've got to do that when it's dry if I want to get that edge, and the same with the top. I'm just doing a quick workaround while the foot is damp. And again, this is damp up here, but I might just be able to come in carefully with the grey. Or look, what I'll do is actually turn the video off for a minute and come back to it when it's dry. I did what I hate and gave it a quick blow dry. I would never do that early because this doesn't get time to granulate and do its own magic if you hit it with the hairdryer early in the process. But for the want of actually moving on, that was my best bet. So now I've actually just picked up a little touch of neutral tint. This wing is grey blue. So neutral tint with a little bit of cobalt perhaps in it. We'll see how that turns out. And I'm not going to have it even the whole wing. Like, nothing in life is all one colour or tone. So I'm dropping the darker tone that I've mixed in some places. It's very dark just there as well. And then I'm going to clean the brush and come back with a lighter version of that, maybe with a little touch more blue in it. Or, do you know what even will work? Clean water. So clean water on my brush, just pick that up. I'm looking to see where the light areas are. This way the paint will travel wherever I dampen. As I come up here, it does actually get quite blue, so I am going to pick up some cerulean blue or cobalt blue on the brush as I come up that roundness of the wing. And now a little bit more grey in it, a little bit more neutral tint. Clean my brush. And now I'm just going to dampen between these two and see whether that gives me the look that I can see in the bird, where it's varied and darker grey in some areas, lighter blue or grey in others. This is the edge of the shadow, which looks a bit darker at the top edge of that wing. And this has a softer, I've actually made it the wrong shape. It's more curved. I made it a bit convex and it was more concave, or vice versa. Pull that back. And I can also see in there, because I'm really training my eyes always to look for those variations in colour, I can see a lovely yellowish glow even in that wing. So just dropping a little touch of that yellow, Naples yellow in. It's darker down the bottom, that's what I want. I might have it a little touch darker just up through here. I've got to be really careful now. It's still glossy, so I can keep working. I can add more colour, as long as I have less moisture in my brush each time. So I don't re-wet it if I can help it, or if I do to clean the brush, then I have to dry it off on the paper towel. If there's an area that I feel is too dark, I can lift out with my brush. So I cleaned the brush, dried most of the moisture off, and just lifting. And I'm doing that because I've realized this little tail is really dark. So I want the wing to be a little bit lighter here where the tail pops out behind. I want this area to be a little bit more smooth. So I'll just catch that with the clean brush. And there's a darker shadow as well, dividing the leaf from the body just in underneath that white part of the wing. And because that's actually on the body, that's part of this shadow, I'm going to put the colour there and then soften with a clean brush next to it so that it can travel out and be soft where it links into the body of the bird. And sometimes you want to darken some areas of a shadow as well. It's not necessarily always perfect in that first wash. So I might just put a little bit darker there. The bird also has feathers and is not a smooth porcelain, object. So I don't necessarily need to soften these shapes. I might leave some dry edges because I'm working on dry paper now, not wet. It leaves harder edges either side. So I'll make the decision, do I soften them or do I leave them? And that will just be each one individually when I'm putting these extra shapes of shadow on. I can see that this shadow up here needs to be much darker where it comes away from his head, but this is wet, so I'm going to wait till that dries and then I could build that up if I wanted to there. We've got the darker shadow on the leg. So we still see red glowing through it. So what I've done is just picked up brown matter. So if you don't use brown matter, you probably use burnt sienna. So I've used straight brown matter, and then I'm going to add a little touch of blue to make it look like a shadow. So this is ultramarine blue. The shadow comes around and underneath. We see shadow in some other parts of the foot as well. And some parts of the shadow are lighter than others, so I'm just going to pick up the straight red or brown matter and just run that. I just want it thinner, but I've still got my big brush. Run that up through the middle of the foot and up the side. I just want to connect those two, so just softening that colour and letting it bleed in together a little bit will do that. I'm going to strengthen this a little bit more and just dampen next to it so that it softens out. We've got this little tail poking out here, so it's nearly black. I can come straight in with very little moisture in my brush because the wing isn't fully dry, and just pop that shape in. It's a bit of a yucky straight triangle shape, so I might just break up the end. The beak is kind of light and yellowish where there's highlight. I might actually, I don't really touch the brush. I was going to say I might actually just leave that white for the purpose of the demonstration, but I'll let that dry a touch now and then come back to it. The eye is yellow, so Naples yellow is perfect there. I'm just mixing a few reddy browns, so light red, brown matter, a little touch of cad red. I didn't actually want that to travel into that yellow that I popped there, so I'll show you at the end. It's always good for me to make mistakes so I can show you how to fix them. The beak is curved where the shadow is. And this at the moment looks like a red beak. It doesn't look like a red beak in shadow, so I do need to drop a little touch of blue into it to shadow it. So I'm just going to show you now. I will actually press back and push with my fingernail on the fold of the tissue to just stop that traveling quite as far as it was. I can also see the shadow just at the top. I've changed down a sizing brush to one that doesn't hold quite as much moisture, more so than because it's smaller. I want to get some of this lovely dark, you know, the beak is really dark. It's actually nearly black right at the tip of the beak down here and in this part. The eye is too damp to do this eye. This one's just a hint of an eye. There's some nearly dark black bits making the foot and the leg look a little bit more knobbly. Now I didn't put any of the steel colour up here because the foot was damp. I want to try and leave a highlight just there at the edge. And it gets a little bit bluer. The sky's reflecting. And this part over here is going to be in shadow, so that will be darker. It would have made sense to do that before the foot. And so now where it turns over the rounded edge of the top of the pole, I just wanted to leave that gap all the way around, even though it's not all the way around, just to show you. Then I would change the direction and just pull the paint. No, do need to pick some up, but pull the paint over where I want it in the direction so that it looks as though it's coming flat across the top and then across a rounded shape. We need some more dark up in here. It's not all light and even coloured, and it's got a darker edge just before it falls off. And this shadow I will put on when it's dry, because it's got a sharp edge to it. I can put the shadow shape on down here. And now I'm pretty much just using straight neutral tint for want of speed more than anything. But I can still see this gorgeous yellow glow happening there. So I don't fill the whole shape of the shadow with the neutral tint. I can see there's also a lovely little gap and then another shadow shape. So it's looking for all of those details that make your painting really interesting. The yellowy glow is what makes that look as well like the welding is lumpy. And I could darken this over here. I'm leaving a little gap because I am going to drop a little touch of yellow in. This part isn't a cast shadow though, so I do want to soften it out, but it's darker across to about halfway. Just drop that little touch of yellow in before that dries and sharpen up the shape out there. And now perhaps just a little touch more straight blue. Oops. And I'm dampening now with clean water past it so that that is a gradual shape, a gradual shadow. It's just getting darker as it's away from the light. But you can see also, if we pop just this little glow of yellow in here and there, a glow of blue somewhere, we'll get a much more interesting shape happening here. And you want to be really careful not to, oops, it's not dry enough, not to overdo the detail of a feature like an eye. We just want to hint at the detail. Hopefully, actually, if that dries just like that, it's probably pretty good. Just pop this sharp shadow on. I'll give this a little bit of detail with the dark, with nearly nothing on my brush, just to show that it's not flat and smooth. And a little touch more shadow just near the foot. So this needs to blend down into there, so I'll just dampen it with clean water because this, it's hit form shadow now. Sometimes I'll have to darken part of a shadow, so I come back to my Cobalt blue and Alizarin crimson mix. A little touch more Naples yellow. Oops, I went too yellow, so I needed to add more pink, then I went too pink. And I'm just trying to avoid where I've got that neutral tint colour in this spot of my palette. I'm just knocking a little bit of paint off my brush there so it's not quite as wet. And up into the head a little bit. So I've cleaned my brush now, and I'm just going to spread the colour just a little bit where I haven't filled, just with clean water or next to nothing on my brush. I wanted to keep that yellow glow happening there. I want to create this shape a little bit stronger coming through there, so it'll come onto the wing, catch that little bit of light that I left, and then what I do is just dampen next to it. My brush was a little bit too wet there, so knock it off on the paper towel. I cannot paint if I don't have paper towel beside me. I normally have a little stack of it, when I'm traveling, serviettes. I pick up serviettes from every place I stop to eat. And I can see this gorgeous little reflection that I've lost now just in underneath the beak. So I'll just drop a little touch of yellow back there. Now as it's drying, with a nearly dry, a little bit less pigment in the brush, I want to just darken that line of the neck so that we've got a little bit more definition just along there. Now the other thing that I've missed is, this is light, but it still softens into blue. I'll just soften my, I'll turn it around because I like to have it face the direction I'm working. I just want to soften this line a little bit that the grey has given me just within the edge. So all I do is use a stiff brush with just a little touch of moisture on it. And now again with a brush that doesn't hold as much moisture as that one I was using, I'm just going to drop a nice bluey mauve just into that area. I'll leave it super light just there. I'm going to soften this bit before it dries, so nearly nothing on my brush moisture wise. Tiniest little bit just coming next to where it's forming the line. I wanted it darker, but I didn't want a strong line, so I've got to just watch it and manipulate. A little lovely shape of blue, like cerulean blue, just on this white part of the bird's head. But that's about all for the purpose of this demo. Sometimes if you just wanted to strengthen up the detail in an eye, even just doing it in pencil will be good for that. The other thing is just a tiny little bit of yellowy colour on the other side of the beak. And what I was going to show you, I remembered with this eradicator brush. So everybody says, you know, you can't correct with watercolour. If I wasn't painting any background and I wanted it perfect, and this little bit here bothered me, this brush is by Rosemary & Co. and called the Eradicator. It will lift that back nearly to white paper. So I can just neaten that up a little bit. I'm not painting in a, you know, super clean way. I've got splashes there. I would quite often, if that happens by accident and I miss it and don't lift it off, sometimes then I'll just actually do a few more little splatters. And that's probably about it for today's demo. Thank you for watching.